Now, I want to open up this question for everyone. Put this law into perspective. Now that we're further along in its implementation, what would you say is the single most important aspect of the Inflation Reduction Act for the auto industry, and how is the law affecting the investment strategies at your company or for your members specifically? Let's start with Mohammed.
Thanks, Audrey. So I think the IRA is going to have a profound impact on the automotive industry in general. One, the green incentive that we're seeing, either coming into the electric battery or the battery electric vehicle, is going to have an impact, one, on the climate as well as an economic front as well. We see this from the investment perspective, also beneficial to our company. We see that for hydrogen as well as electric vehicle from the e-motors that we produce in some of our plants, or we will invest here to bring into shore. So with that perspective, we see a significant amount of money that we're putting into our North America region, specifically in the US, for the South Carolina side, closer to 600 million, as well as from the Chip Reduction Act as well, which we invest in Roseville, closer to 1.5 billion. 5 billion, sorry.
Thank you. Deeana?
Yeah, I think what's really exciting about the IRA is that it's creating the demand. So there's the demand side aspects of the IRA, and then there's the supply side of the IRA. And both of those instruments have been put to use together in a way that's like, a flywheel, and it actually accelerates our ability to scale manufacturing capacity. So for one, we just turned 3 years old in July, and in these last 3 years, because of first the infrastructure bill and then the IRA, we've been able to announce our first Gigafactory, a $1.6 billion investment in southeastern Michigan in Van Buren Township, where we'll bring over 2,100 jobs. But because of the IRA and because of the way it's structured, which also it's an equalizer, it levels the playing field. It allows American manufacturing to come online without a hindrance of having to compete on price as we're scaling the supply chain. So it gives us that, that leg up. It's really this moment for manufacturing. And I think the other part of it that's really exciting is that the legislation ultimately also is an investment in American families, because we have all of these instruments that are working to increase the affordability for Americans to have EVs. So it's moving the market. It's really exciting.
Thank you. Dan, what about you?
Yeah, so I would agree with my fellow panelists. I think the most significant provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act are the supply side incentives, the 45X production tax credit for clean energy programs. However, I would say on the demand side, there's significant provisions as well. But when we talk about the consumer tax credit and affordability, when we kind of look at this, the day before the president signed the Inflation Reduction Act, there were 92% of EV models available that would qualify for a portion of the tax credit. GM and Tesla models had hit the production cap, so they were disqualified. The day after signature, with North American assembly requirements coming in, that number went down to 35%. Today, 1 in 5 EV models available qualifies for a portion of that tax credit. So there's room to grow. I think we were already seeing, one's a great example of onshoring and domestic battery manufacturing. It has increased the pace of that, but it's going to take a little more time to get that affordability and that access to that consumer tax credit that, rightfully so, gets a lot of the attention in the press of bringing on what batteries are going to qualify, what vehicles are qualifying, manufacturers, etc. So I think short answer, supply side is probably the most significant, but there's still a lot of opportunity on the demand side as well.
Thank you. Jennifer, what about you?
So I would agree with everything that was said. There's no question 45X, the advanced manufacturing credit, probably was the most influential piece of the Inflation Reduction Act. It has definitely brought a lot more investment, a lot more attention to more production here in the United States. And when it comes to the actual electric vehicle credits for consumers, obviously, like we talked about, others have talked about, on the sourcing side, that's had a significant impact for the industry. I will tell you, for my members, which are the international automakers, they have been working towards this transition now for some time. They've already invested $22.5 billion in the United States since 2020, and they continue to make more of those investments to make this transition to electrification. So I would say the Inflation Reduction Act has helped on some of those fronts, and it's also presented some challenges that everyone's trying to work through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to dig into the EV tax credit part of this conversation. I know it's one piece that's really dominated my reporting over the last year. So, just to clarify for any audience members who don't follow it as closely as some of us do, the IRA revised the consumer tax credit for new EV purchases while creating 2 other credits for used and commercial or leased EVs. The tax credit for new EVs, known as 30D, comes with the most restrictions, as it not only sets limits on MSRP and buyer income, but also final assembly and sourcing requirements for battery components and critical minerals, making it much tougher for vehicles to be eligible. And I want to toss this question maybe to Jennifer and Dan first. How have these eligibility restrictions affected automakers' EV strategies, and what are they doing to make sure their vehicles qualify, especially as the EV battery content rules get tougher each year? And Jennifer, maybe we can start with you, just given that a lot of your members' EVs don't qualify right now, just given the North American assembly requirement.
Yeah, sure, happy to take that first. There's no question there's a lot of requirements that would put on the 30D credit to receive the 30D credit. I'd like to say that it is only available for specific vehicles and specific consumers. And so there's a lot of limitations put on it. But I will say, and of course, as soon as the law was signed, immediately the final assembly North America piece came into effect. And so you're right, for a lot of models that were out there, they no longer could not get the credit, whereas you could have the day before. And so that was tough. I will say 45W though, which is the leasing, the commercial leasing provision that's in the IRA, has been helpful in that regard, because a consumer can lease a vehicle. It doesn't have all those same restrictions and requirements that the 30D credit does. And so that has really given us the time that's needed, that transition period, to get all of the sourcing requirements for consumers to better understand what they're eligible for. They can lease the vehicle, and there's a lot more models and choices they can choose from, and there's no restrictions on consumers. So I will tell you, my members have been working very diligently to try to determine exactly what the rules are. Treasury's been a little slow in putting out some of the guidance, and we're still waiting for guidance on exactly what they need to do to qualify, to get their vehicles qualified. So it's a work in progress, and it's taking time, but there are several of my members' vehicles that receive partial or full credit right now. It wasn't like that immediately, but as time has gone on, they've been able to do that, and I expect to see many more vehicles who receive some or all of the credit.
Dan, anything to add?
Just a couple things. I think some of Jennifer and my shared members was exactly that. Many of them had announced investments into the U.S. to have their electric vehicle production here. It wasn't ready in August of 2022, so immediately they were disqualified. I do think we're going to see more vehicles coming online that can meet those requirements. I do also think that, Mohammed and Deeana can probably testify to this, the OEMs are asking a lot more questions about the supply chain of their tier 1, tier 2. They're getting down to tier 3, tier 4, where those minerals are coming from that go into the batteries. So I think it's becoming more of a transparency issue as well of where exactly these materials are being sourced. So I think we're seeing more of those, or likely seeing more of those conversations.
Yeah, and I kind of want to dig into that with Mohammed and Deeana a little bit. What do these restrictions, especially on EV battery sourcing, mean for suppliers? Are they triggering a restructuring of supply chains, more localization of supply chains? Deeana, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think in implementation, there's always opportunities to improve, and I think we're experiencing that across the board. Guidance, like delayed guidance, and trying to actually make decisions as you're waiting for guidance, that can be challenging. But as a domestic battery manufacturer, the intent of the law that allows a company like one that is also then putting that emphasis on developing a North American material supply chain from the ground up, and that supply chain is also being built from the ground up. It's given us also an advantage in the market, which I think is the intent, is to allow for domestic American, battery manufacturing to be birthed and to grow. So I think the intent of the law is supportive of that, and then I do agree that we need to think about the gradients that move the market, that move people towards decisions. I think restricting consumer choice is inherently challenging, especially when the consumer choice is not all the way met with EVs as they stand today, which is something else that we're very focused on. So I do think that we have benefited from it, and then it's also challenging to build that North American supply chain that then meets all of the requirements. It's not without its challenges. I think the addition of the free trade agreement countries like Korea and Japan have been very valuable, because then it allows for a stepping stone before you have to fully localize supply chain here. But it is absolutely going to take time, and I do echo and empathize with the implementation challenges.
Mohammed, what about you?
So I think it's easy to craft the law and design it, and you do a good advertisement and campaign about it. The issue with that is you translate it into action, and to release the guidance from the Department of Energy or Department of Commerce or Transportation to make sure that this translates into actions, it becomes a little bit difficult. But what we're seeing is to secure supply chain in North America, or in the US specifically, we've seen a lot of the manufacturing start to rebuild in North America. What the IRA does now is able to offer certain incentive for this supply chain to localize, which means you can reduce the cost by creating the demand or the pressure upfront for the back end to drop with new facilities, as well as new suppliers for this material that's required, either for casting, steel, aluminum. It's not just batteries, it's a lot to take to build the EV. Beside that, also the local content that requires to meet certain requirement from the USMCA becomes on the top of that. So building that supply chain from almost zero to 50, 60, and 70% content related, it requires a little bit of patience, a little bit of transitory period. So when you see the inflation itself, you have the structural part, and the structural part can get compensated by the IRA incentive for building the manufacturing and the supply chain.